Welcome back. What if we told you our state lawmakers passed legislation making it legal for our Supreme Court to take all lawsuits filed against the state of Michigan away from the judges that usually handle them and handpick different judges to take them?
Well, that is exactly what happened. And in part one of our special report called Silent Justice, Joe Khalil tells us how that happened.
This is what making sausage looks like. It's not the prettiest sight.
This is a whole pork shoulder. We're not using trim, we're not using body parts, we're using fresh, clean meat.
Brandon Decker at Mertz Meats in Okemos says often sausage gets a bad rap. People think it's dirty. Decker says that may have been true in the past, but today most sausage is made from very clean meat.
And we inspect it thoroughly. The pork that we put into the sausage is good enough to cut and eat like any other piece of pork.
What does sausage have to do with this story? We'll get to that soon. For now, let's transition from the kitchen to the courtroom.
Anytime someone sues the state, then it comes before the Court of Claims.
From tax cases to the governor's secret nerd fund, the Court of Claims handles a variety of lawsuits against the state. And since the 70s, those cases were brought exclusively before Ingham County judges like Rosemary Aquilina.
Most of the state agencies are in Lansing. That's their headquarters. If there's an action against them and you need people to testify or respond, they're right there.
Bruce Timmons worked on the legislation that brought the court to Lansing in the 70s. He says the move was practical, and you could make a strong argument that nobody knows Michigan judicial policy better than he. In fact, he wrote a lot of it.
I retired after 45 years with the legislature, and I started as an intern back in 67, 68, and I've dealt with court issues almost the entire time.
Fast forward 35 years to this past November. Our current legislature decided to undo Timmons' work.
When somebody sues the state of Michigan, why do the judges only come from Ingham County? This doesn't make any sense to me.
Senator Rick Jones says only 3% of the state elects Ingham County judges, and they shouldn't make rulings that affect the entire state.
So I came up with the idea of allowing the Supreme Court to select appeals court judges. 4 would be selected, and 1 at a time they would serve as the Court of Claims.
Read it.
But Judge Aquilina cried foul. See, she and the 4 other judges who handle these cases are elected in a Democratic district. She and some Dems at the state capitol say Jones's bill was an attempt to take certain cases away from her court and hand deliver them to the Supreme Court, which is controlled by Republicans.
They want to rig the courts, they want to stack the courts, they don't like what's coming out. It is sending a message to judges that if the legislature doesn't like what we do, they're going to take away our ability to rule.
Certainly there were some cases. I asked Jones if he was just trying to get favorable rulings for Republicans. He gave me a resounding
No. In fact, I've never been critical of the Court of Claims judges.
But even Bruce Timmons, a lifelong Republican himself, says he's not buying it.
I opened it up and read it, and the more I looked at it, I said, what is going on here?
Timmons testified against the bill before a House and Senate committee.
This strikes me as not right. I don't know of any instance in the time I've covered this issue, which is 45 years, where there's been action by legislature to take a case away from a judge and give it to another judge. And that's in effect what these are doing.
Despite the objections, the bill passed both chambers and the governor signed it in 2 weeks.
Well, again, I think it's an appropriate thing to do because it was really about getting representation across the entire state. It's broad-based representation, and I think it can be a good answer.
Obviously,
Timmons says he doesn't know exactly how it all came together, and frankly, he isn't sure he wants to.
no, there are 2 things you don't want to see being made, sausage and laws.
There you go.
In this instance, it's an indignity to the sausage.
We're using fresh, clean meat.
Which brings us back to Brandon. You guys have really cleaned up your act.
Absolutely.
If you ask Timmons, sausage makers are looking better every day.
Okay.
Certainly one way to put it,
Wow.
Joe. You said in the report that the Supreme Court can take cases away from the circuit court judges. Has that happened?
It started to happen now. We've seen that a little bit. And you heard Judge Aquilina talk there. She was so passionate about this because she told me one main reason that she was upset is a lot of these cases are midway through the case when they're transferred over. She said some judges almost ready to make a ruling on a case in the circuit court, and it was just pulled from them and given to an appeals court judge.
Yeah, that's got to be difficult. Did other judges speak out against this law when it was being debated at the state capitol there, Joe?
Yeah, you know, when I first did this story, I've covered this issue from the beginning when this happened. The bill passed in November. After I did one story about it, I was contacted by a source who gave me a number of emails. And in these emails, there were circuit court judges talking amongst each other. And in the emails, they were saying we should stay quiet about the Court of Claims bill, because if we do, the legislature will be more likely to approve raises for us. I was shocked to see that. It felt like some of these judges that we've elected have sort of sold out in a way, and we'll have more on that tonight in part 2 of this story at 11. We'll actually show you some of those emails that we got.
All right. Definitely interesting. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
In part 2 of our investigative piece, Silent Justice, Joe Khalil examines a controversial new state law that changes the framework in which judges handle lawsuits filed against the state.
Now, as it turns out, many judges chose not to speak out about this issue because they say they thought staying quiet would mean a pay raise from the state legislature.
In November, it took our state legislature just 2 weeks to change an entire court system in place for 35 years.
They want to rig the courts, they want to stack the courts, they don't like what's coming out because we follow the law.
Rosemarie Aquilina was one of 5 Ingham County judges who handled lawsuits brought against the state's government. That is, until the new Court of Claims bill passed, which allowed the state Supreme Court to take certain cases midway through away from Aquilina and hand them to a different judge in the appeals court. She didn't hide her objections.
This is the beginning of the dismantling of the justice system in Michigan.
This is judge shopping in its worst form.
Many Democrats, including Senator Gretchen Whitmer, say the real reason for the Republican-sponsored bill is to cherry-pick certain cases and put them in the hands of the state Supreme Court, which, as they point out, has a Republican majority.
Is it to take the NERD fund questions out of the Ingham County court so they can handpick who determines them? Yeah, I think that's exactly what's happening here.
Why now? This has been 30, 40 years. Why now?
Because the most important cases are coming down. We have the bankruptcy case. We have the Open Meetings Act violations. We have teacher pensions. We have all sorts of important cases in front of all 5 of us.
But if this law were such a miscarriage of justice, why weren't more judges outraged like Aquilina? Well, the answer was unsettling. 6 News obtained emails sent among dozens of circuit court judges showing many thought that if they stayed quiet, lawmakers would reward them with a higher salary. We are currently hoping for our first pay increase in over 10 years. Adjusting the compensation is more important to the administration of justice than Senate Bill 652, says Circuit Court Judge Charles Johnson. Former president of the Judges Association, Lita Popke, says we do have legislative issues. Most notably is our current strategy to restructure how judges are compensated. We can't afford to jump into a legislative train where we may negatively impact an issue of concern to our membership. And this from Oakland County Judge James Alexander, as reported by the Detroit Free Press. If y'all want to engage in a suicide mission that will impact our ability to get compensation, so be it. Count the votes. You may not like it, but it's big boy politics. I spoke with Judge Alexander, who told me lawmakers didn't promise he'd get a raise. He says he just assumed it.
Count the votes. People were opposing something that was very obviously going to go through the legislature. You pick your fights. You pick the ones that can be helpful that you can win. This one we couldn't win.
All of these judges denied getting a sweet deal from lawmakers, but just 2 days after the Court of Claims bill passed, House Bill 5153 was introduced to raise the salary of those very same judges.
I understand why it creates some degree of suspicion.
State Rep John Walsh sponsored the bill. He says the timing does seem suspicious, but denies ever making any backdoor deal with judges.
No one in this legislature, including me as the bill sponsor, could have promised anyone action for neutrality or support on the Ingham County matter or any other matter.
To Walsh's credit, we've searched but found no evidence of any direct link between the legislature and these judges. But the fact remains, these people, whom you've elected to administer justice, evidenced by these emails, decided to put their legal ideals aside in exchange for the possibility of a few more bucks in their pocket.
Very interesting, Joe. Well, actually, have they started taking away cases from the Ingham County courts yet?
We have started to see that, cases from one court to the other. That happened about a month ago, but the bill actually was passed way back in November. Now, the reason that we've held on to this story and we haven't done it until now was we were looking for a link between those judges and the legislature, wondering if these judges are under the impression that they could get a raise from the legislature if they stayed quiet. Why do they think that? Who told them that? You know, we assume they didn't just come up with that on their own. Couldn't find any smoking gun, and we talked to our contacts in the legislature, and I talked to multiple judges. But what we did find, pretty upsetting, I think, to some people, that the fact that these judges made the decision that they were going to not take a stance on an issue that directly affects them and our court system in exchange for the possibility of getting their own raises.
And you saw that in the email exchange.
You saw, I mean, it was clear as day what their intention was.
It would be very interesting to see what viewers think about the change in the law from the beginning, just to see if they really think that those cases should have been taken from Ingham County and given to other judges.
Yeah, and we'll see in the next couple of days, I'm sure, with some of our feedback. Hopefully, we welcome that feedback too on our Facebook page and online.
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Joe.
Joe.
All right.